I mean, you know, like any cult, it started with just a lone man, an Indian man, with a lovely long beard, and who was very sort of irreverent and attractive. He had beautiful welling eyes, as I describe them in the book. He was intelligent, and I think this was in the 60s that he had a small gathering, locals, Indians, and then word got out, and you know, more sort of Europeans came to visit him and listen to his teachings. He was clever in that he drew together Eastern philosophies with what was going on, what was developing in the West at that time, which was psychoanalysis and philosophy, and you know, so it was quite a nice sort of mishmash of different influences. And you know, the East was becoming more and more beguiling to the West, and it was mysterious, but it was also, the West was looking to the East for inspiration. You had the Beatles had their own Maharishi, they had their own guru. You know, there were, I guess, more people were traveling across the seas. They were exploring these countries. But also, I think at that time, you know, the sort of late 60s, or it was obviously post-sexual revolution, post or around the time of sexual revolution, and also experimentation with LSD, there was a sense of something other, you know, that we wanted more than just what we had been given by our parents' generation, who, of course, I'm not saying me, this is my father, his parents' generation, who were post-war. You know, it was all about sort of domestic commercialization, you know, in terms of sort of buying a really nice washing machine, having a comfortable home, you know, feeling very kind of grateful for what you had. But I imagine that to my father's generation, this could be quite mundane, you know, the sort of suburban thick carpets and net curtains. So yeah, it was definitely, it came out of a restlessness, I guess, in culture, you know, certain particular people at that time who were looking outwards perhaps, and looking for some kind of alternative life. So yeah, so it just grew like a lot of these religions did. Bhagwan went to university, studied philosophy. He was very clever, as I said, but also I think he was, well, I realized recently that he was sort of practicing hypnotism from quite a young age as well. And that became quite a big part of the movement. I mean, it was very much based on meditation, but what he called active meditation, which was a kind of vibration, you know, you're sort of jumping up and down and dancing and hooing and hollering and almost hyperventilating. So disciples would get into quite a kind of heightened state and feel quite high when they were in the ashram, or you know, in certain meditation practices. And then he would give these what he called darshans, which were his rhetoric. You know, he would sit and talk about his view of the world and give advice, and people just simply fell in love with him. And I think he obviously had a lot of charisma. And, you know, my father said that when he was in his presence, he felt physically, he sort of felt a vibration going through his body. You know, he felt this physical aura, this physical presence. And I've heard other people say that about him as well. So, you know, I can absolutely understand in those early days how it was so attractive. And I mean, I never went to Pune, but I've seen videos of what it was like in those early days. And, you know, and I think it was very appealing. There were lots of intelligent, educated, interesting people, often from kind of quite creative backgrounds, just hanging out and having a really nice time together and working for the community, you know, creating things. There was a big emphasis on art and therapy, meditation, music, and, you know, obviously a beautiful place, very rich and lush and lovely gardens, and, you know, it was hot and, yeah, exotic. And then it got too big for the ashram in Pune, and so they started looking for a bigger place, a bigger outlet, you know, or space for them all to be in. And that's when this woman Sheila got involved, who was his secretary at the time, and she was sent out to America. The other thing that was happening was that as Bhagwan was getting more and more popular, his books, you know, his lectures would be translated into books and then published. And you know, there was kind of a bit of a kind of marketing campaign around him. And you know, his lectures and his sayings were being circulated. People were leaning on him and learning from him, not just in his presence. He started to become a bit of a celebrity. And I guess America had kind of felt like a rational place for them to go. So Sheila went to Oregon and found this big kind of ranch. It was big wild country, which this was all covered in a documentary that was on Netflix recently called Wild Wild Country.
Yeah.
Which, you know, was very well done actually, and it kind of brought the cult to the mainstream. I mean, I remember in my childhood in North London, there were lots of sannyasins around. I mean, obviously I was part of it with my dad, and my dad was living a little bit in Hampstead for a bit, and he was going to and fro the communes in the early days. But he also lived in a place called Medina, which was a commune in Suffolk. But I remember just seeing sannyasins around, you know, these people dressed in the colours of the sunset with their malas, and, you know, that was North London. And I think, you know, in lots of cities around Europe, it was quite a common thing in the kind of late 70s, early 80s to see these characters. But when it moved to America, you know, it just got much bigger because they had this big space, and they built a city and they called it Rajneeshpuram. And, you know, and it's incredible actually watching Wild Wild Country. It was hugely educational for me just to see quite what they managed. You know, they built the infrastructure for a city. They put in electricity, water. You know, they built these houses and massive meditation centers. And and one thing I reflect on in my book is, I think, you know, this is my opinion, it may not be correct, but Bhagwan went into silence quite soon after he moved to Oregon. And I wondered, you know, whether it was just too big for him. You know, it had been quite self-contained and much more emphasis on meditation when it was at the ashram in Pune. But then suddenly it kind of got taken over by Sheila, and it became something much bigger. And it was much more about work rather than meditation. So people could only stay in Oregon if they were working. And they worked hard for the community. So yeah, things kind of shifted, I think, when they moved to America. And if you watch Wild Wild Country, you'll see that then also the political situation became much more fraught, because they actually took the wild country, the ranch, under false pretenses. It was supposed to be used as farmland, and they obviously had no intention of using it as farmland. And so there were lots of legal issues around that. They had taken it illegally, and the local people of Oregon were not happy to have them there, and the Rajneesh people were not good neighbors to the local Antelopian people who lived in Antelope, which was the local town. And they, you know, they started to sort of force them out of the town, and they took over the town, and the mood of the place became a lot more power hungry than it had been before. And then it all turned pretty nasty with the FBI kind of getting involved, and yeah, they really quite intense. And Osho in the end got arrested and deported and not allowed back in America.